Few characters deserve the title of fan favorite more than Itachi Uchiha. In the 26 years since Naruto's release, the results of Itachi's sheer popularity, well, they speak for themselves. 2 light novels, 2nd place in the worldwide top 99 popularity poll. He even won 1st place in a Best Big Brother segment in Data Book 3. Itachi's good standing in the community is impossible not to notice, and he happens to be one of my favorite characters in the story as well. So why then is this video titled In Defense of Itachi Uchiha? Well, for one, I'm not here to defend his actions, nor am I here to call him a good person. Instead, in this video, I'll be advocating for Itachi on a front even more important than the moral one, as hard as that might be to believe. Instead, I'd like to advocate for him on the comprehension front. This is because, in spite of his popularity, the question I see asked the most about Itachi is, was he wrong or right to side with the village against the Uchiha? I have a few problems with this question, and the best way to love those problems out is to talk about Itachi himself in the most detail possible. A lot of my peers have offered their own interpretations of this character, and I recommend you check those videos out as well, but for me, everything to do with Itachi relates back to the choice that he made between his clan and his village, so I'll be centering this discussion around that. Now, as we get started, I'm going to do something that I really hate, and that's asking a new question to answer one that's already been asked. You see, we shouldn't really be asking, was Itachi right or wrong to begin with? But if you really want to answer, you have to ask, why did he do what he did first? So bear with me for a minute and things will tie back into the main question soon enough. Itachi is unique in the fact that he gets 3 separate introductions in this story. First, Sasuke refers to Itachi in chapter 4 as someone he's sworn to kill, which serves as a conceptual introduction. At this point, Itachi has no name, no familial connection to Sasuke, and no design, he's just an idea. We don't learn that he's Sasuke's older brother until chapter 27, and at this point Kishimoto had only planned for the character to be a relative of Sasuke's who had done something bad, that was it. After this, Itachi gets a second introduction, a physical one this time. In chapter 139 entitled Eulogy, Itachi arrives at the gates of the village during Hiruzen's funeral. We'll be coming back to this chapter later, but in terms of introducing Itachi, it's in this stretch that we learn that he's a rogue shinobi, stronger than Orochimaru, and that he had killed the entire Uchiha clan. Note that Sasuke had already said as much in chapter 127, but that is clarified a little bit here. It's also important to note that as soon as Itachi was physically introduced into the story, Kishimoto had already decided that he was going to be a secret good guy, which brings us to his third and final introduction. In chapter 220, at the peak of part 1, we get 4 uninterrupted chapters of Sasuke's childhood, at a point in time where Itachi still lived in the village. We didn't know it yet, but if chapter 4 introduced us to the idea of Itachi, and chapter 139 introduced us to the image that Itachi presented to the world, then chapter 220 introduces us to Itachi, the actual person. We'll talk about all 3 aspects of the character in this video, but Itachi the person is going to be our best starting point in answering the question of why that we just posed. The reason why this is our starting point is because we learn everything about Itachi in these chapters, or at least everything about the person he was when he made the decision to kill his clan. For example, in terms of personality, it would be most accurate to call Itachi an introvert, someone who was always a little different and never liked to get too close to other people, someone who was hard to read. It would also be accurate to call him a genius, plain and simple. Itachi graduated from the academy at the top of his class at 7, had gained use of the Sharingan by 8 and became a Chunin at 10, but his achievements on paper actually pale in comparison to the grasp of the world that he had from an early age. Itachi's true gift was always his mind, and it would actually do him a disservice to label him as just mature for his age. We'll talk more about this later, but it's clear from Itachi's observations, specifically in his conversations with Sasuke, that he always had a very deep understanding of life, shinobi, the clan, and the village. And on top of that, it's crucial that we understand that from his own mouth, having power means being isolated, and that leads to arrogance. Already it should be clear that Itachi was at risk of suffering from this isolation and resulting arrogance, especially as an introvert with an unparalleled mind and talent as a ninja, but that risk becomes all the greater when you take into consideration the fact that Itachi was a double agent, under considerable pressure from both clan and village. So who was keeping Itachi grounded at this point? Well, there was Shisui for one, his closest friend. Even as early as the 220 flashback, the implication that these two were similarly yoked in terms of talent and mindset was clear, as Shisui was one of the foremost members of the clan at a young age, just like Itachi. They were like brothers, and it's easy to imagine that they would have been able to confide in each other, but there was also Sasuke, Itachi's brother by blood. There's a short scene during this flashback that lays Itachi's priorities completely bare when it comes to clan, village, and Sasuke. In preparation for an important mission, Itachi cuts a training session with Sasuke short and they head home. Later that day, Fugaku, their father, sits them down to let them know that he'll be tagging along on this important mission as well, as it'll be essential for the clan to have one of their own, Itachi, in the Anbu if said mission is successful. But in Fugaku's fixation on the clan, he forgot or maybe even ignored that he was supposed to be attending Sasuke's Ninja Academy entrance ceremony, which also happened to be scheduled for the same time as this mission. So Itachi, with tact that goes beyond just maturity, cuts through the undertones of this conversation and throws his participation in the mission that he himself had just said was important earlier to the wayside. He won't be able to make it because he's attending Sasuke's entrance ceremony tomorrow. Of course, he said this knowing that it would force Fugaku to drop out and support his other son. Shocker. And he also probably said this knowing that he'd be able to carry out the mission without the extra help, but the most important thing here is that while Itachi cares about both clan and village, he holds Sasuke above them both. This is the idea that stretches across the entire series for Itachi, and this is the core of the foundation that we're given for the character. But of course, things immediately go south from here. Discontent within the clan solidifies into plans of an outright coup against the Leaf, which puts Itachi in a tough position, of course, as a spy for both sides. Shisui dies, leaving Itachi virtually alone in all of this, and suddenly all of the risk of isolation and arrogance that Itachi spoke of himself becomes a very real problem for him. So with no one that he viewed as an equal by his side and time running short, Itachi was presented with a choice that both appealed to and magnified all of the worst aspects of his situation. His solitude, his feelings towards clan and village, his desire to protect his younger brother, and most importantly, his own knowledge of his capacity as a shinobi. You see, it wasn't just that Itachi thought like a Hokage from a young age. In fact, comparing his way of thinking to leaders like Tobirama or Hiruzen without context actually does him just as much of a disservice as simply calling him mature for his age. Itachi paid attention to the signs and teachings of his predecessors that no one else paid heed to, and as a result, he understood the village in a way that no one else did. As a result, the people around Itachi, including the current Hokage, left everything to him in his hands alone, and for reasons that might even make sense on the surface level. People described Itachi as perfect time after time, and as his isolation reached its peak, it's fair to say that he might have even started to believe this himself. So when Danzo came to him with an ultimatum based on the intentionally restrictive dichotomy of side with the village or side with your clan, Itachi didn't spend any time looking for a third option because to him, the choice in itself made sense in every way. Who else but Itachi was alive and left to make this call? Who had the foresight, the intelligence to weigh these options fairly? Who had the resolve to carry out the decision once made, the self-control to kill their emotions and wage war against either clan or village? Who was strong enough to tip the scales of this conflict single-handedly? And most importantly, who had the right mindset to make sure that the fewest people got hurt as a result of the choice that they made? Itachi had been isolated as a result of his genius, his personality, his capability, and his mindset from an early age, and we all know what isolation and power lead to at this point. We'll talk more about the significance of this choice being offered to Itachi by one of the most evil characters in the series later in this video, but for now, just understand that with Itachi isolated and arrogant, all Danzo and the village elders needed to do was push, and the chance to save the life of Sasuke, who Itachi cared for more than anyone else, was the cherry on top. So that's the why taken care of, and if you've been paying attention, you could probably tell me whether Itachi was wrong or right in his decision right now, without me even telling you outright. But at the same time, hopefully it's becoming clear that there are more important questions to both be asked and answered than that when it comes to Itachi. So I'll be continuing my defense of the character on the comprehension front, so to speak, by largely leaving behind the Uchiha massacre and going over some aspects of Itachi's story that don't get enough attention, in my opinion. Contrary to popular belief, Itachi's development does not end here, and for us to fully understand what he becomes by the end of the story, we have to look into the effects of the choice that he made, as opposed to getting caught up in whether he was right or wrong. You might think that the shift between the Itachi we see in chapter 220 and the one that appears in chapter 139 would be a drastic one, but in reality, it was almost instant. As soon as Itachi decided to shoulder the burden of killing his clan, the story started to present him differently on just about every level. Think of it as the difference between potential and action. How many times have we as fans of this series wondered what would happen if insert character here stopped holding back or actually acted as smart as they were? It's through Itachi's actions starting at this point that we understand why he was so exceptional and why he would even believe he could carry out such a difficult mission. It's because on paper he almost did. Before we even get into any ability design or character related aspects of the presentation that I'm talking about, let's start with something simple that does not really get discussed very often. I do want to stress though that I'm only using manga canon here, so if you want to mention how the novels interact with this idea, definitely just let me know in the comments. But that aside, before the Uchiha massacre, Itachi casually finds Obito. He had been studying Obito's movements for a while, researched his ideology, and understood that he would be helpful in killing the clan as someone who had a grudge against both the village and the Uchiha. It's clear that Obito himself didn't expect to be discovered here, as the first thing he says is, "How did you know about me?" Later we learned that Itachi also knows that Obito was behind the Nine Tails attack, and there's really no reason to think that he wouldn't have already made that connection here. So already, before Itachi even does anything physically, it's possible that he had already solved one of the biggest mysteries in the series, something that no one else in the village could do, and completely twisted the situation to his advantage by pointing Obito at the Uchiha and entering a pact with him to protect Sasuke and the village. We'll talk more about the dynamic between Itachi and Obito later, and it's definitely not as simple as Itachi just having the upper hand over Obito the entire time or anything, but this interaction has to be covered. To put it simply, the story paints Itachi as perfect for his role in every way. Tobirama's observations on the Sharingan and the power of love might come from literally the most biased source in the series, and we're still learning things about the Mangekyo and Boruto, but I do find one of his statements to be a helpful framing device when looking at Itachi's abilities. When an Uchiha arrives in the agony of the loss of a great love or disappointment in themselves, a unique chakra gets released in their brain and reacts with the optic nerve, and changes appear in that person's eye. Of course, Tobirama refers to the phenomenon called the Sharingan. So what meaning do these words take on when applied to the context of Itachi? Well, Itachi had great love for several things: his brother, his family, his clan, his village, and even life itself, as Itachi was also described as a pacifist. He would go on to experience great loss after Shishui's death, but I think the most interesting part of this idea lies elsewhere. During the 220 flashback, Itachi delivers a monologue to the Uchiha clansmen who come to deliver the news of his best friend's death. After they make it clear that Itachi is a suspect, his composure shatters. Now, this is a very layered scene, and we'll return to it from another perspective later, but for now, I'd like to establish that on some level, there's some truth to Itachi's words here and the feelings beneath them. After knocking all three of his clansmen to the ground in broad daylight outside of his house, he says, the clan, you babble on, but you overestimate your own abilities, and you have no idea the depth of mine, which is why you're crawling right now. You cling to your organization, to your clan, and to your name, but you are narcissistic and arrogant, and you fear what you don't understand. Pure idiocy. His meaning here can be taken to be directed at these three, but these words also apply to the clan itself. As Itachi watched his entire extended family prepare to attempt to take over the village, despite the ramifications that such an attempt would have for the Land of Fire on the world stage, he would have experienced a great disappointment. Itachi intimately understood the clan's position in the village. He was familiar with the negative effects of linking serving as law enforcement to a specific ethnic group, shocker. You can see it in his reaction to hearing his innocent younger brother crying out that he wants to join the police force too when he gets older. But Itachi obviously wasn't in favor of the coup. You can hear it in his words here. That aside, the main point is that Itachi went through an unimaginable amount of loss and disappointment both before and after making his choice, and that made his eyes all the stronger. In the right, Itachi gained a Amaterasu, representing the will of fire that he inherited from his predecessors. Almost everything Itachi did was for the well-being of the leaf, and just like he was able to understand the leaf in ways that no one else could, the fire in his right eye stands at the peak of the fire nature release, burning anything within his sight, even if his target is other flames. Their black color also holds significance. We'll be talking about the importance of black and colors in general later, but for now, all we need to understand is that Itachi learned from Shishui that shinobi protect from the shadows, and as a leaf ninja of the Uchiha clan bearing the will of fire in a way that no one else could, it only makes sense that the Amaterasu would be black. In the left, Itachi gained Tsukiyomi, representing the manipulation of reality required to carry out such a mission. After he made his choice, Itachi resigned himself to appearing as a completely different person in the eyes of the people around him, a mass murderer and a parricide at that. Everyone in the story, whether we're talking about ninja from other villages, former allies from the Leaf, or even other rogue shinobi, know Itachi first and foremost as a traitor. It's a reputation that he both embraced and can't escape. But the closer someone was to Itachi, the more effort he needed to put into altering their reality. The best example of this is Sasuke. Anyone who knew how these two were as children would have never been able to believe what things came to with them, but from Sasuke's perspective, Itachi looked worse than a traitor, worse than a mass murderer, and worse than a parricide. He looked like someone who did all of these things on a whim, simply to test his capacity. To completely reverse his little brother's perception of him though, Itachi needed something more effective than his left eye alone. Characters like Itachi, Obito, Madara, and later on even Sasuke, who specialize in manipulation, understand that it takes more than just brute force to control another person's actions. To get the outcomes that they want, they observe their targets, plant seeds, and most importantly, show them what they expect to see. In the 220 flashback, we watch Itachi pay close attention to Sasuke, noticing that he was curious about Itachi's special mission and why exactly Fugaku was so worked up about it. When the three Uchiha clansmen showed up to interrogate Itachi, of course Sasuke stuck around to listen in, which serves to recontextualize Itachi's monologue yet again. It's fair to say that while these words had some truth to them, they were also partially said for Sasuke's benefit, especially when you take into consideration the look that Itachi flashes in his direction that only Sasuke would have caught. It's here that Itachi throws a kunai at the Uchiha crest on the wall outside of their house, declares that his ability has been repressed by this pathetic clan, then flashes his eyes at his brother, all to plant a seed. With the foundation laid, Itachi was able to completely reshape Sasuke's worldview in the aftermath of the massacre with a few words. When asked why he did what he did, Itachi's response of "to test my capacity" were the words of a madman, yet his instructions to his younger brother were clear. If you can't kill me now, settle for hating me until you can. When they met next and Sasuke was still too weak, Itachi reminded him with a simple, "You don't have enough hatred." Because this aspect of the story is told from Sasuke's perspective, Itachi's manipulation even has meta-contextual weight. Beyond just about everything Itachi's saying to Sasuke being iconic, we also get 3 separate flashbacks to the Uchiha massacre, each revealing another layer of truth to that night. First, we get nothing but Itachi's words by themselves, labeling Sasuke as a weakling and a coward. Then, we see Sasuke's life leading up to the massacre. After that, we learn that Sasuke went as far to pursue Itachi as he fled and that Itachi was crying as he left. Then finally, we get the entire truth from Itachi during the war arc. He manipulated Sasuke so well that even we as readers didn't know what was happening, which is why Itachi is a character who benefits so much and can only be properly observed in hindsight. But meta context aside, the most important instruction that Itachi gave to Sasuke by far was to find him when he had the same eyes as Itachi. We'll get into the importance of this phrase and the multiple meanings it takes on a little bit later, but for now, all we need to understand is that almost everything about Itachi can be seen in his eyes, whether it's his love, his disappointment, his loss, his motivation, or his mission. That aside, the rest of Itachi's design also contributes to his presentation in the story. His basic jutsu arsenal is exceptional, demonstrating the gap between him and just about everybody else really well, whether we're talking about the fireball jutsu that marks him as a proud Uchiha, the genjutsu that makes a one-on-one fight with him a huge problem for most, the exploding doppelgangers that are just busted, or the strategic ability that ties it all together. Crows and Itachi also walk hand in hand. They feature prominently in his genjutsu. He keeps Shishui's eye in a crow, and he has others on hand as summons. Crows are famously intelligent birds and are even capable of speech, which makes them clearly the right companion for one of the smartest characters in the series. Even Itachi's physical design lines up with his narrative purpose, as we see his eyes repeatedly shadowed or hidden during his early introduction, both hiding his intentions and leaning into the darkness that Itachi willingly plunged into for the sake of the village and his brother. Of course, as we learn more and more about Itachi, we see more and more of his eyes, and even his clothing loses its layers, going from an Akatsuki cloak that he occasionally takes one arm out of to the gray clothing that he wears underneath. So that's a good bit of Itachi's image and how it reflects his presentation within the story. Regardless of the layers that fall away as the manga continues, the clear impression here is one of complete capability. Itachi endured more than just about anyone, used every tool in his disposal, and carried out his mission perfectly from the perspective of many. All of this serves to set up the true point of Itachi's character within the story, that he still fell short and failed for reasons that even he couldn't get past. With that in mind, let's talk about Sasuke first. Predictably, right, traumatizing and manipulating a child into following a step-by-step plan for success didn't pan out very well for Itachi. The idea here was to use hatred as an all-purpose tool for shaping Sasuke. It was to be his lifeline, his motivation, his reason for strength, and his path towards meeting his older brother again. This caused some issues, to say the least. For one, Sasuke's motivation to stay alive until he could get revenge on Itachi only lasted about one arc. After Land of Wade, Sasuke immediately starts talking about being willing to do anything to reach Itachi, which paradoxically leads him to make choices that put his life in danger. The curse mark is the best example of this, epitomized by the symbolism in Kakashi's explanation of the seal that he puts around the curse mark in chapter 69. According to Kakashi, even if the curse mark awakens, the seal should contain it, but the power of the seal comes from Sasuke's will itself. For the seal to work, Sasuke has to want for it to work and believe in his own power to control the curse mark. Kakashi being the one to give Sasuke this speech, along with others later on in the series, really does make sense when you consider the fact that both of these two had to deal with influential relatives in Itachi and Sakamoto that left negative impressions on them. That aside though, this kind of seal was never going to work well for Sasuke, who had already decided to throw away everything to reach his goal. But this idea of Sasuke risking his life isn't just limited to the curse mark. He also risks his life by testing himself against those he views as measuring sticks in his journey towards his older brother. Against Gaara, he forces out a Chidori when he's at his limit as a way of proving to himself that he has enough hatred to challenge Itachi. By the end of part 1, his inhibitions have been eroded away by hatred to the point of him instantly reaching for the curse mark against the Sound Four, which Sakon immediately admonishes him for. Sasuke then risks death yet again to reach the second stage of the curse mark. Even his frustration with Naruto's rapid growth links back to Itachi's manipulation of his reality, to the point of Sasuke even trying to follow Itachi's instructions of killing his best friend to gain power at the Final Valley. To be clear though, Itachi didn't say this with the literal goal of making Sasuke into a murderer. The intention was to convince Sasuke that Itachi had killed Shisui, thus solidifying the idea that he wasn't Sasuke's kind older brother, and was in fact someone who would kill his best friend for power. But Itachi saying that and then using hatred as a motivation for Sasuke to become stronger presents a problem where Sasuke might inadvertently follow these fake instructions after exhausting what he perceived as all of his other options, as we see happening here. My point here is that no matter how good of a manipulator Itachi was, he was never going to be able to fully control how Sasuke would react to being traumatized in the way that he was. People like Obito and Madara saw arguably better results as manipulators, mainly because they didn't care about the people they were using, but in Itachi's case, he was trying to puppeteer the person he cared about the most in the world. Sasuke's hatred actively hurt him and endangered his life at several stages. Obviously, if he had died against Gaara, he would be dead. And if he had killed Naruto, he would have lost the person most important to his redemption later on. But from Itachi's perspective, he believed he could protect Sasuke and guide him in the right direction. The stark contrast between these two even goes all the way down to their color schemes. As children, they both wear black, but when they meet again after the Chunin exams, their black clothing is highlighted by Itachi's red and Sasuke's blue, and Itachi's torture of his brother essentially throws him into Orochimaru's clutches, where Sasuke takes on purple as well. This idea of Sasuke falling towards Orochimaru to reach Itachi even corrupts the idea of these two brothers one day having the same eyes. At the Final Valley, it's Orochimaru's eye being compared to Sasuke's at the pivotal moment, not Itachi's. And at the end of the first half of the story, Sasuke rejects Itachi's instructions, swearing to become a better man than him. But even if Sasuke realizes that he shouldn't be literally killing his best friend, that does nothing to change his get power by any means mindset. In part 2, he understands that neither he nor Orochimaru are strong enough to beat Itachi alone, and he's prepared to give his life many times over to reach his older brother. This doesn't mean though that Sasuke hasn't grown closer to having the same eyes as Itachi, depending on how you interpret the meaning of that statement. Now, Sasuke can see the Nine Tails, the power inside of Naruto that the Akatsuki are pursuing. He can see through Orochimaru, both his jutsu and his motivations, as he realizes that Orochimaru's goals are just as hollow and meaningless as he views Itachi's to be. He's even become a bit of a manipulator with some talent in shaping the reality of others. Against Deidara, Sasuke wins by observing his opponent, planting seeds and showing him what he wanted to see. But all of Sasuke's growth up to this point, his decision to absorb Orochimaru, his assembling of a team, it's all taken place within Itachi's sphere of influence. As Sasuke approaches his older brother, we start to see an association between Itachi and storms. Just about every time we see him in the middle section of part 2, it's raining. This creates two effects. For one, the metaphorical storm over the story builds up to the fated battle between brothers, and the literal storm that punctuates their fight reaches its peak with Kinen, the jutsu that Sasuke had imagined would kill Itachi. Secondly though, and maybe even more importantly, in a storm it's easy to hide whether you're crying or not. This fight is full of all kinds of visual storytelling, but in the interest of time, the main other thing that needs covering is the idea of Itachi being a wall that Sasuke has to climb over as his older brother, and how he corners Sasuke against a wall here just like he did in part 1 before falling. In the end, of course, Sasuke didn't have the same eyes as Itachi quite yet, and he was being shown what he wanted to see the entire time. Even the chapter covers during this stretch reflect that idea, with Sasuke being right side up in the smaller view and Itachi being upside down, but their positions being reversed in the foreground. Going off of the orientation of the Uchiha crest in the middle, it's clear that Itachi is the one right side up and thus in control here in the bigger picture. That aside though, after Itachi's death, the meaning of his words continued to develop along with the concept of Sasuke gaining the same eyes as him. The first example of this is a literal one, and it's gonna require us to talk about Itachi's dynamic with Obito. To put things as simply as possible, Itachi recognized Obito as a threat and took steps to make sure that he wouldn't be able to interact with Sasuke or harm the village. As a final act, he sealed Amaterasu in Sasuke's eye, and it could be said that when the seal came undone, Sasuke had the same eye as Itachi, at least for a moment. Unfortunately though, Itachi didn't know everything about Obito, while Obito knew more about Itachi than he ever realized, which is never a good position to be in. As a result, Obito essentially undoes a lot of the work Itachi did in his life by telling Sasuke and later others the truth, and in the later half of part 2, when we hear about Itachi, it's usually from Obito's perspective. Ironically enough though, even though Obito has a well-deserved reputation as a liar, he does get a few things right when it comes to Itachi that need covering here. For example, Obito's idea that Itachi meant for Sasuke to awaken the Mangekyou at the end of their fight makes a lot of sense. I've already spoken about why Itachi wouldn't want Sasuke to literally murder his best friend to get it, so I won't rehash that here. More interestingly though, Obito has a seemingly throwaway line about Itachi achieving revenge on the Uchiha by making Sasuke into a hero of the leaf. That actually gels really well with the conflicted feelings Itachi must have had towards his clan, which is what I was getting with earlier with the disappointment point I made about the Sharingan. Also, Obito's observation that Danzo and the others use Itachi's love for the village to manipulate him was right on the money. That all aside, despite Obito saying a few true things here, he lied more than he was truthful and proceeded to manipulate and use Sasuke just like Itachi did. The further Sasuke sunk into darkness, the more he started to understand his older brother, and the more similar their eyes became. For evidence of this, we can point to Sasuke speculating about the pain Itachi must have experienced from the Susanoo, the blurry vision POV shots that Kishimoto liked to draw for both of them, or most explicitly, Sasuke straight up taking Itachi's eyes at the end of 5 Kage Summit. Now, the last thing that needs covering in terms of Itachi falling short are his various contingencies. We've already talked about the Amaterasu that he sealed into Sasuke's eye, but even the crow with Shishui's eye that he rigged with Kotoamatsu Kami fails to stop Sasuke because Itachi himself comes into contact with it first after he's been reanimated during the war. This is all to say that regardless of how well Itachi carried out his mission, contingencies and all, Sasuke still learned the truth and Obito was still left free to be evil and roam around. In other words, despite being the perfect person to take on this burden, Itachi still couldn't do it because it was simply too much to do alone. Now I do want to be clear, when I say alone, I don't mean that Itachi literally did everything by himself. He used people like Obito and Kisame at times, of course. The best way for us to understand the issues behind Itachi's thinking is for us to examine some narrative evidence within the story and look into Itachi's own words and thoughts on his action to contextualize what I mean here by alone. After Itachi's death, the story presents us with two characters that represent aspects of Itachi's personality, actions, and priorities. Once again, after looking at the parallels on display here, I'm sure you'll be able to tell me whether Itachi was right or wrong without me even telling you outright. So let's start with Danzo. As the leader of the Foundation and Tobirama's disciple, Danzo was always of a similar mind to Itachi when it came to protecting the village from the shadows instead of seeking praise or glory. He refused to step in during Pain's invasion and delayed Naruto's return to engineer a situation where he could be Hokage, not out of any bad will for the village, but because he believed that he was the best person for the role. In other words, Danzo did morally reprehensible things and only kept his own counsel. Sound familiar? He also was associated with Orochimaru for a time, just like Itachi, but the parallels reached their most prominent during Danzo's fight with Sasuke. It's here that we see Sasuke yet again facing off against someone who wants to steal his eyes, just like Itachi allegedly wanted to do during their fight. Even Izanagi, Danzo's ability to rewrite reality and undo his mistakes, is a metaphor for Itachi's contingency plans. Every time that Danzo speaks about Itachi, the dynamic between these two deepens. It turns out that Danzo knew more about Itachi than anyone else living aside from maybe Obito, as he had knowledge of the Susanoo and both of Itachi's Mangekyo abilities. But despite all of his familiarity with Itachi's capacity, he was still convinced that because Sasuke knew the truth, Itachi must have failed in his mission and undone all of his work by revealing everything to his younger brother as he died. As a result, Danzo labels Sasuke as Itachi's greatest failure. And in a way, at this specific point in time, it's hard to say that he's completely wrong. Itachi might not have directly told Sasuke the truth, but his failure to put Obito down still led to Sasuke learning what had happened. But even with that in mind though, Danzo is still wrong about Itachi. He took the secrets of the village to the grave. In a way, Danzo assuming this plays into his arrogance, the idea that of course Itachi fell short, because who else but Danzo would have been able to do what was necessary to protect the village and keep its secrets. So to sum up my point here, Itachi becoming just like Danzo, one of the people largely responsible for the burden that Itachi ended up shouldering, isn't a good look for him. But there's a second dynamic that lays things out even more explicitly. If Itachi had stayed dead after prophecy and vengeance, he would have been frozen in time, defined by the actions he took during his life. In that case, maybe it would be fair to ask if he were wrong or right in his decision. Even if you didn't agree with me on the validity of some of Obito's observations or the meaning of the Danzo parallel, on some level, there would still be room for an argument that this interpretation of the story was still a subjective one. Unfortunately though, Itachi does not stay dead, and when he's reanimated during the war arc, he's forced to come to terms with the consequences of his choices and develop. With Itachi back in the story, we see the return of some familiar story elements, specifically the storm that had always punctuated his relationship with Sasuke. When these two meet, it's in the midst of yet another storm, and we get a brief glance at some of the crows that Itachi was always in the habit of using as well. It's here that we also get the second character who represents some aspects of Itachi's personality, and it's really on the nose this time. Of course, I'm talking about Kabuto. Just like Danzo, he has a deep association with Orochimaru, but the obsession with the Uchiha is taken up a notch here, with Kabuto wanting to take Sasuke's entire body for experiments instead of just his eyes. Kabuto is repeatedly stated to be just like the old Itachi. Here, not only do we see a reintroduction of the contingencies metaphor with Kabuto continually reforming himself in the image of others as he attacks Sasuke and Itachi, but we also see that metaphor extended to include Izanami as an inverse jutsu that forces one to examine their shortcomings. Itachi pretty much spells it out for us. The pairing of these two jutsu together gets at the idea that there is no single thing in the world that's perfect by itself, and that cooperation between opposing halves is the correct answer. This calls back to the words written on the Uchiha shrine, to the dynamic between these two brothers, and to Naruto and Sasuke's relationship. We even see Itachi's new color scheme reflecting his dynamic with Kabuto, as they both wear red, symbolizing the choice that Sasuke has to make between the two of them. Through Kabuto, we see Itachi outright say that he made the wrong choice, and that instead, he should have trusted others to share his burden with. He says that maybe Sasuke could have changed the clan and that it was a mistake to shelter him because of his youth, and at the end of their conversation, after apologizing to his younger brother, he feels as if he can now die with no regrets. So there's the answer outright. Itachi was wrong. He handled the situation poorly. His isolation led to arrogance, he was manipulated by Danzo to make a selfish choice to save his brother, he failed to stop Obito, and he traumatized Sasuke in the process. But that's kind of the point. The situation needed to be badly handled so that Itachi could become something larger in the story, a symbol for more important characters to interpret and learn from. We see this in Naruto, who ends up inheriting Shishui's will and doing what Itachi couldn't alone, save his little brother. Itachi becomes quite the influence on our main character, teaching Naruto what he learned from his mistakes and reminding him what it means to be Hokage, someone who never forgets their friends. Naruto and Sasuke's fight at the Final Valley can largely be described as a debate over the lessons of Itachi's life and what path should be taken in the future. So, to sum up everything I've said here, Itachi is one of the most important characters in the series. His talent, his love for his clan and village, and his dilemma all create the foundation that Naruto and Sasuke benefit from as the main characters. Here, hopefully I provided the necessary context towards why we shouldn't ask whether he was right or wrong. Itachi himself says that he was wrong and the story agrees with him. However, that doesn't mean that there weren't outside factors like the village elders that manipulated him and took advantage of his talent, isolation, and priorities. Itachi also isn't a flat character, and we should spend more time as a community paying attention to the final section of his story as opposed to just the first. So with all that in mind, if you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. This was a long one and took a lot of time to make, but Itachi is one of my favorites, so I wanted to do him justice. If you made it this far, definitely think about subscribing, and other than that, have a good day.